Obviously, this isn't considered a murder, it's considered a closed case. But the reason why we're covering it is because there are a lot of questions around it, right? And it does seem, in some ways, her death does seem unsolved. There's questions around blunt force trauma to the head, but how did that happen, right? How did she sustain those injuries? And obviously, there's a lot of people that care, and there's a lot of people that want answers. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to True Crime Unsolved. I'm Miles Reef. I'm here as always with my buddy Sean Cahill. This is the place where we tackle the stories that the TV networks won't touch. Guys, it's Monday. That means we're getting into a comment react. This last week, we actually didn't put up a comment react. That's because we were having, as we had mentioned in the Kristen and Jesse video that went up last Friday, we were dealing with some issues with YouTube and our last case breakdown not being promoted. So we were kind of trying to navigate that. We almost put up a new version of the case breakdown, and that was going to be our Monday drop. And then we kind of decided not to do that and to just leave the one that we put up there and just let it not be promoted and leave it intact with the B-roll and all of the body cam footage and stuff that had gotten us hit on the YouTube censorship. So apologies. I think this is maybe the first time, or maybe the second time since we've had the channel that we've missed a Monday drop with our comment react. So we love doing these with you guys, and we did miss doing that last week. But Sean, is there any other channel business that we need to get into before we start?
Not really. I think, I just wanted to say my quick piece on that little bit about the Leanne Beck case breakdown. And it really is like it's a fine line, I think, sometimes for a case like that, where we have a lot of material that can illustrate what actually happened. And then you're dealing with YouTube and it's like, okay, well, we're balancing all the stuff that is important for the viewer to see versus the risk that YouTube might, algorithmically sort of handicap you because they feel like the content's disturbing. And, I just want to say, I think we made the right decision because it is important to see that stuff. So, yeah, we realized we were kind of walking a line with it. It's possible that showing the important stuff would get a smaller viewer count. And obviously, we want a lot of people to see this story. But if they're seeing something and not understanding it, does that really matter? So, we made the call that we made. And I think, we'll put a link to that case breakdown in this description and in every description for the interviews on that case so you guys can see it. Otherwise, the good news is that Leanne's friends really showed up in these interviews. And if you haven't seen this last Friday's with Kristen and Jesse, you guys should check it out. They were amazing. They gave us so much information. And, without even having to see any photos, they kind of gave us a lot of backstory on this that is crucial to understanding what happened here. So that's it. Otherwise, we have the podcast going. We have the membership area. You guys know all about that. And we'll put up the links to that at the end of this video. But I think we have a lot of comments this week to get into, right? So maybe we should just dive in.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so we're going to start with comments on Leanne Beck. Now, these are just from that case breakdown. Anyway, so let's get into it. So this is Leanne Beck case breakdown comments. So first one is Jazzapone3 says, it's clear what happened. He was the only one with her, and he claims he, quote unquote, couldn't tell you about the injuries. Those are pretty substantial injuries for the person with that person not to know what happened. He knows what happened. He caused her death, whether on purpose or not. He is responsible. He needs to be tried, especially with his abusive behavior with previous girlfriends and with Leanne. He has a pretty long list of run ins with the police in the past. Mommy has money, so I'm sure that played a part. She was a good person, and now two babies grow up without their mother. Stay tuned for the future episodes because there is much more to this case that people need to know. He needs to be exposed, and people need to know the kind of person he is. So obviously, I mean, just reading through this comment, and I hadn't read this one before we jumped into this. This is someone who seems to be very close to and familiar with the situation. Seems to be someone who's very close to and familiar with Leanne. And again, I think it's important to say that the comments that we're reading here are the opinions of the commentators, and we are merely providing a platform for those people. And yes, we'll go back and forth with them. But obviously, these are the opinions of the folks who are leaving these comments. Now, having said that, I will say that Jazzapone, what they're saying here is not something that we haven't heard before from other folks who were close with Leanne and close to her throughout her relationships and through that kind of couple of years prior to her death.
Yeah, and I think, from where we're sitting, where we're not in the business of accusing anybody outright of anything they haven't been charged with. I think the most important thing is look at the injuries they're saying. And that's exactly goes back to what we were just talking about. That's why we left those images in there. Even though they're blurred, you can still tell those injuries are really significant on Leanne. And so whatever happened, whether it was an accident or foul play or some third option I'm not thinking of, she had some serious trauma to her body. And we can see her on camera. Her and Jason are out drinking. They're at a restaurant. They're just kind of hanging out. She's fine. Fast forward a couple hours when the first responders come, she is far from fine. And so you would think that if anyone was with her that whole time, they might know what happened because it's not like you stub your toe and your spouse doesn't notice. It was like this woman had really been through some sort of violent trauma. So the question is, what happened there? And how come we're not getting a satisfactory answer on it, right? So that
Yeah.
is as far as I'm willing to push it, but you're absolutely right to point it out, Jazzapone 3. And I have a feeling you're not going to be the only commentator to to point that out because it is
Yeah.
glaringly obvious, which again
Kind of,
is
it's kind
why we
of,
kept that stuff
I'm
in.
skipping ahead here a little bit. It's kind of all leaning in a similar direction, but go
Right.
for it. Why don't you read the next one there, Sean?
Oh, KG Penguin. Thank you for being a member, by the way, KG Penguin. I see you have your little magnifying glass badge, which is cool. So, KG says, in most lies, there is a little truth. In my opinion, I think Jason hit Leanne with his car when she was outside of the car. He made sure to mention that she fell out of the car so that he involved the car as an aspect of the possible injuries. Nothing about the clothing was explained. The police report said that she was nude. She was, we can confirm that. So I don't know if the medic removed her clothing or if Jason removed them. But since her other belongings were taken from her and moved to another house, it sounds like maybe he was planning on getting rid of the car and any trace of her, then changed his mind and called 911. I don't know if any other reason. I don't know of any other reason he would have taken her things and moved them elsewhere. So that's actually a really interesting comment. I can say for sure because I've seen the first responder video in totality. She was totally unclothed when they arrived, and actually Jason was performing CPR on her at that
Yeah.
point. So all of that stuff was already gone. You can see it in the video. As far as like your theory about why, I mean, that's obviously KG Penguin's conjecture. We're not going to endorse or deny that. That's an interesting theory. And as far as the things being moved to the next house, I mean, we showed pictures of Leanne's belongings, her phone, her Apple Watch, her credit card, all in Jason's mother's house next door.
Right.
They were not there when the first responders got there. So presumably either they were taken off after whatever this emergency was, but before first responders came, or as is raised in the interview with Kristen and Jesse on Friday, perhaps they were removed before anything happened because Jason did have a history, according to them, of being a little bit controlling as far as the phone went with Leanne and maybe even credit cards and communication devices like Apple Watches. We know that there was issues in the relationship surrounding her personal phone versus her work phone and that people had to text her on the work phone because she didn't feel like she always had control of her personal phone. And so I don't remember which one of them it was, but one of her friends in that interview said it's conceivable that for whatever reason in their strange relationship dynamic, she had handed some of that over earlier in the night. I don't think that sounds like the most likely scenario. I think it seems awfully weird that you would do that, but it's sort of like they were playing devil's advocate. I don't even think that they think that's what happened, but it is within the world of possibility if we're looking at the reasons for that, because otherwise it looks extremely nefarious. If you're worried about
Yeah.
somebody to the point where you're calling 911 to save their life, why are you taking their credit card and their watch and moving them to the property next door? That's a really
Yeah.
good question. And I don't think a lot of people have an answer for it that doesn't smell a little fishy, Miles. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, look, there's a lot of questions around the mom and the relationship there, and just the nature of the involvement in in the relationship by the mother, and obviously, like, look, if I had a horrible accident, my mother lived next door, I'd probably call her and say, hey, can you come over and help? Like, that makes sense. Like, like, I understand Jason panicking, something horrible is happening, and he calls his mom, and asked her to come over and help. I do understand that. I don't understand how Leanne's like personal items end up in his mom's drawer in the other house. I don't get that. I understand what Sean's saying about like some idea that like even though they had been separated and Leanne had filed a restraining order and was going through divorce proceedings, that she somehow regressed this evening and was like, here is my stuff because this is how I work within the dynamic of this relationship. Anything's possible. It's possible that Leanne came back from that bar fully intact, walked into the mom's house, put her stuff in the drawer, said, can you hold this for me? And then something happened in
Yeah, we
between the
don't
two
know.
houses. You know,
Yeah.
you would think that there'd be maybe some ring cam footage or maybe a neighbor might have seen something just based on the level of injuries, which again, go back, watch the case breakdown. You'll see what we're talking about. My feeling is that's probably not what happened. That something happened along the way, and by the time they got to the house, whatever had happened to Leanne had happened, and she was in that state, and you know they got her into the house, or he got her. She got into the house, I should say. But yeah, I think there's a lot of comments from people who seem to be close to the case, and there's obviously stuff that's said in the interviews that we're putting up by people who were close to Leanne that Jason did have a very interesting relationship with his mom, and apparently I'm not sure of this, but I've heard that she at least had some financial interest in both homes, if not owning both of them. So yeah, it's interesting. It's very, very interesting.
It just points out how little we know about what happened that night after the last time we see them walk off of a security camera at a restaurant. I think it was really baffling to Leanne's friends that she even met up with Jason that night because of the restraining orders and the breakup, and everything was like really pointing to the fact that there's no way she would go out and have a social night with him at all. But that's what happened. And so everything else after that just gets more and more strange because nobody can even answer why did this begin in the first place, except for maybe sometimes against our best judgment, we reconnect with exes that the relationship's toxic, or not good. And sometimes we do it anyway for whatever reason. We're lonely, we're having some nostalgia. Maybe you meet up and have a drink, and then, your guard drops even more. But you take it from that, right? Which is something probably a lot of people have dealt with, all the way to her credit card being in the house next door. And it's just like there's clearly a story there somewhere that we haven't learned yet. And I think that's the crux of this issue. How did that
Yeah,
happen?
and the question is, will we ever learn? Will we ever find out what happened in that time in between when they left that bar and Leanne was fine, and we see it on that video, whatever put her in that state that, when the first responders walked in and that footage that Sean and I both watched a couple of times now, where Leanne's just laid out and Jason's on top of her performing CPR. So yeah, that's the question, and that's why it's unsolved, right? And that's why we're covering it. Obviously, this isn't considered a murder; it's considered a closed case. But the reason why we're covering it is because there are a lot of questions around it, right? And it does seem, in some ways, her death does seem unsolved. There's questions around what the cause of death is. Well, we know what the cause of death is. I should say it's blunt force trauma to the head, but how did that happen, right? How did she sustain those injuries? And obviously, there's a lot of people that care, and there's a lot of people that want answers.
All right, Miles, why don't you take the next one?
Okay. So Chino, too sweet. Hi, Chino. Thanks for being a longtime subscriber and thanks for getting a membership. We appreciate you. You've been here since the early days. Leanne was definitely out of the car all right. I'm guessing she wanted out because they were fighting. He was enraged and hit her with the car. Speculation, obviously, on my part. I'm pretty sure they had checked his car for damage or blood, but I'm curious if he was driving his car or his mother's. I hope they would have checked hers also. Okay, so I'm going to read the next comment also, but we do know that it was actually Leanne's car that was driven home that night. I don't know if like they had met at the bar and they had left Jason's car and decided to come home together in Leanne's car or what, but it was Leanne's car that was actually driven. And it's interesting that Chino and KG are both bringing up this idea that perhaps Leanne got hit. But I want to buy a car. I want to read this next comment. When this is from Kristen, who we interviewed and whose video went up the Friday before you're watching this. And she's replying to Chino and she says, There was blood on the passenger side of the vehicle, along with the spiderweb crack in the passenger window that has no explanation from Jason either. "Quote unquote, couldn't tell you." So yeah, that is all really, really interesting stuff. I don't know actually if the outside of the vehicle that was driven home was checked for blood or anything like that. Sean, is that something that you saw in the police reports? Yeah, I mean, you
Um,
would think that it would have been checked.
So I can say that there's photographs of the car at Jason's house, and the outside of it looks fine. It doesn't look like it's hit a person or a deer or anything really. The only damage to it is that passenger side window that's a little spider webbed, and then of course the blood in the car. And we know from Jason's story that he wound up driving Leanne's car that night, so she would have been the one in the passenger seat, even though it was her car. And of course, then we look at that damage, that blood in the car, and we look at the state of Leanne, who has a severe head injury along with some other ones. And it kind of makes sense that something happened in there. Now, the question is, what was it? Something like getting out of the car at 5 miles an hour to pee, like Jason says, or is there more to the story? I'll leave that for you guys to decide, but it is, it's worth looking at those photographs and it's worth thinking about what sort of violence could actually cause this versus what we're hearing about it.
Yeah. And yeah, couldn't tell you. I mean, look, everybody's got different capacity when they've been drinking. By all accounts, those guys who drank a lot that night, maybe Jason really couldn't remember. I mean, he had multiple interviews with the police and he seemed to remember more things as they interviewed him more times. So, maybe he just was having some issues because of the alcohol, and eventually memories came back, but not full memories. I don't know. It's hard to say. I will say that and Sean unfortunately is a witness to this part, a good portion of this part of my life. I've put quite a few back myself, and every time something really, really gnarly happened, I sobered up real quick and I remembered it. So I don't know. I don't know. It's interesting. But everyone's different, man. Everyone's different, right? Um, you want to
Absolutely.
take this next one?
So this one is from Ruru, our old friend Ruru. Ruru, thank you for being a member. Ruru says, "My heart sank when you said Maricopa County. Corrupt. Just ask Daniel Robinson's dad. At least they determined homicide, but now they need to follow through and hold someone responsible, and it seems pretty obvious who that person is. People have been tried with way less evidence." Yeah, I mean, look, obviously corruption's a broad term. You're talking about the county in general, which could be everything from, the sheriffs to the prosecutors to every county official. But it does seem like the investigators, at least here, referred a homicide charge and it was, declined by the prosecutors. So I don't know, Miles, what do you make of that?
Well, just that, what you just said, I think is really, really important. The police who did the investigation recommended, to that the prosecutor should pursue a homicide conviction against Jason. And that's just a fact. That's on the record. And then the prosecutors in Maricopa County declined to prosecute. And Sean, what was the wording? I know that we've gone over this a few times,
Said,
but
what was it? Basically, they didn't think it was very likely that they would secure a conviction, and it
right,
was a negligent homicide charge too, just to be super specific, because
right,
they felt like they had enough to get that. There's degrees of homicide, as you guys know. They were
obviously,
pushing
yeah,
for negligent homicide, meaning that something happened that was caused by something happened that was caused by Jason, and that there was negligence involved in one way or another. So
right.
that
But for
was what
whatever reasons, they felt like they weren't going to get a conviction even on that, right? And so I don't know, like there's other cases that we've looked at where, people scream corruption and you start looking at it, you're like, wow, I'm not one to chase UFOs and Bigfoot, but, it seems like in this particular place, there might be some really weird stuff going on. So our next batch of comments here is on the murder of Austin Kanu. And people are still commenting on that, which is pretty amazing. Vincent Just 7064. Hi, Vincent. Thanks for the comment. Watching your February 23rd read your comments video, This is more of a question for the police. Is there footage of someone riding a bike to and from the house doing dry runs in the days, nights, or weeks prior to the act? Did the ex get rid of a bike soon after the hit? That's such a great comment, Vincent. The problem with, as I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware, is that, Ring cams and, home security systems and stuff like that, often, they're running on a loop. So it's like it's re-recording. So, I don't know personally how often they get re-recorded. So I don't know. I do know that they did do a sweep, and obviously, they got the footage that they got. So you would think that they looked back. But it's a very good question because, we have to also remember with this case, which has been really interesting, and I think Sean and I have acknowledged this, but, we have had some contact behind the scenes, with some of the people working the case, and, they're aware of our coverage. And they have been very careful in the information that they've released. They were very careful in their description of the alleged perp. They were very careful in parsing out that footage that they eventually did release, which they had much earlier on, and they waited and they put it out there. So who knows? I can't answer that, but I can say that there's a good chance that the key investigators in this case are going to watch this video. So I will tell you that, and they might hear your question, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and I'll remind everybody, I mean, they waited a significant amount of time before even tipping their hand that they had the video that we see, of the person coming and going from Austin's house. It was quite a long time before that was even made public. So I would say my guess is they've looked for this footage. If it exists, they have it. And if I'm the person on that bike, I'm going to be losing sleep over wondering just how much they've seen. And I think that's part of the strategy. If I had my guess, no one's told me this specifically, but I would guess not letting that person know exactly where they've been seen and how they were seen and how much is out there is part of helping them make a mistake. They could have
Right.
nothing. They could have a lot. We don't know. We really don't know.
Right.
And that goes to the next part of your question too. Did the ex get rid of a bike soon after the hit? We don't know. No one's been able to talk about that part of the investigation with us. I would assume that they looked at everybody in Austin's life as far as bike sales and bike
Yeah, you would
acquisitions.
think that yeah, looking for bike receipts became part of the investigation
I
pretty
would think
early
that would
on.
be real
Because
quick. Yeah.
I think they had that footage pretty early on, and they were probably looking into it, and then it was released strategically. And as Sean said, who knows what else they're sitting on? So, I think that these guys are doing a great job. From what I can tell, and I'm hoping for a conviction at some point on this case.
A lot of times, cases like these, Miles, it's a game of poker. You don't want to show what all your cards are. You're betting on the person across the table from you not knowing what you're holding, and I think that that's common for every homicide investigator, and that's probably what we're looking at here.
Absolutely. You want to take this next one?
Sure. Rachel on a whim. What a great name. It's just so evocative. It could mean
Yeah.
it's a really, really good one. All right. Rachel on a whim says so many tragic things about this case, but something really sad that I keep thinking about that I haven't seen anyone point out is the fact that Austin's daughters, more than likely, won't ever have a relationship with their little brother. Because, of course, Austin's daughters were with his ex, and their little brother is with Mary, who is Austin's current wife. Yeah, look, never say never. I know that that's something that is really that bothers all of us. You're right to point that out. That hasn't really been touched on very much, probably because we don't like to harp on the children in these cases unless it's, just the relevance of, this person has children and they matter, kind of like we just talked about with Leanne Beck. But yeah, I would hope that that's not true. I mean, you have to think too that siblings, as a rule, generally will outlive their parents. And so even if there's not a great relationship right now between all the adults involved in this story, it doesn't mean that one day these people won't connect, especially because they all share this loss in their life of this amazing father and this mystery, right? Which hopefully isn't a mystery forever and that, they all get answers. But I would hope and I would imagine, even if right now things are difficult, that these daughters and their little brother will at some point, have some sort of a relationship. Well, one would
Yeah.
hope, right? I mean, it'd be a real tragedy if not.
I mean, it's like we're reading comments on two cases, and both of them have this situation with these kids, right?
Yeah.
And it's really like you guys are really like art viewers, man. They
Yeah.
always find they always find the heart of these stories
Yeah.
and just tear them out, you know. And it's God bless you guys because you really really care. And honestly, it is really tragic, man. I mean, you know, to have siblings and not know them and to be separated from them because of circumstances that are out of your control, you know,
Well, yeah.
it's
And I'll say really
crazy.
quick,
And these are both, sorry, but these are both situations where there's children that are being, you know, that had one parent, you know, that and they're separated, right? You know, it's the same thing with Leanne Beck's kids and it's the same thing with Austin's kids.
yeah. Well, what I was going to say is that I think too, the important thing to remember is that there are adults in this situation who are advocating for there to be a relationship. You know, Austin's parents want that really badly. I think
Yeah.
Austin's wife Mary would like that for her
Yeah.
son, to have a relationship with the daughters who she knows and lived with and is fond of. And I think that it's not that no one here wants that to happen. I think the majority of people actually do want to see that happen. It's just about all the other complications that come with this
Yeah.
particular situation, which is unusual and unusually complicated.
Yeah, and there's suspicions and there's anger and there's you know heavy emotions, right, with these adults. But at the end of the day, it's these kids. It's really about these kids, and I think that's so important in both of these cases because ultimately they're the ones that they lost parents, and yeah, it's really really tough because who else better to lean on than a sibling that you could grow up with and share experiences with and have memories with. So yeah. Oh boy. Thanks a lot, Rachel, for that incredibly insightful and yeah, very emotional comment. It's really, 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 really insightful. Richard Turney Jr., 1555. Thanks for the comment, Richard. Austin was a college buddy. I'm sorry, man. We both worked on our careers and built a family. Oddly enough, we ran into each other in Cyprus and began communicating more. This was so sad the day I learned of his passing. I can't help but lean towards the ex. She wanted her children back. This was a way of making that happen. I mean, look, it's seems to be a theme again and again that people are bringing up. You know, I don't want to harp on it anymore about Austin Sachs in this vid, but obviously a lot of you guys have some very strong opinions about that, and you know I can see why. And Richard, I'm sorry for your loss, man. That's terrible that you guys kind of reconnected later in life, and then this happened to him. It's really really tragic. We've heard from a few of Austin's friends actually who he went to school with, and one of his fraternity brothers we spoke to on the phone. A lot of
Yeah.
people have been in touch with us. So
Yeah, I'll say that for sure. I mean, it's interesting how much Austin was a really beloved guy because we had so many like off the record emails, phone calls, messages with people who knew him and remembered him. Even people, I think we read a comment last week, people who just were in high school with him, but like, said I never really spoke to him more than a couple times in my life, but I remember him so well. He seemed like a
always
great
always had a
dude.
smile. He was a really
Yeah.
nice guy. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it
Yeah.
is interesting. What I can't help thinking about now, seeing these two comments back to back, is that a lot of times when someone is lost like this and they're murdered or they go missing or whatever, it brings a lot of people together. People come out of the woodwork, right? I knew this guy 20 years ago and I still remember him. And they cohere around the memory of this person. And then it's really interesting and odd to see the people who don't and how things fracture, where you wouldn't want them to. And that's heartbreaking. A lot of times there's nothing suspicious about it, right? Sometimes there is, but when you see families or friend groups or whatever get destroyed, like this person is gone and now everyone dissipates. You don't see it as often, but it's heartbreaking to see that. It's much more heartwarming to see people use these awful moments as an opportunity to kind of like connect with each other after a long time and say nice things about the person who's gone. And Austin's story has a lot of that, going on. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting because, we were just talking earlier about Leanne and how many people have reached out and what impact she had. And Austin also seemed to be somebody who really was liked, you know?
Lacey Anderson too, going back a couple weeks earlier, we got a lot of
Yeah.
outreach from people about her that remembered her
Yeah.
20 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And again,
that's
like guys, we're not trying to like, you know, put sainthood on any of these folks and say they were perfect people or anything. It's just I think it's just important to acknowledge that these are folks who were missed by a lot of people when they passed away the way that they did, and did make an impact and brought some positivity into the world. I think it's important to acknowledge that.
well, it goes to show you what an impact you're making on the people around you, whether you're thinking about it every day or not. So maybe the best way to close this episode is to remind you all to go hug somebody that you care
Yeah,
about and let them know because they're going to remember it
yeah.
long after
This
you're
turned
done
into a
thinking
very
about it.
emotional.
It's so super
Uh,
serious.
we
Do we
usually
need
we
to put
usually
this
stay
behind
so
the
professional,
paywall?
Sean.
Yeah,
What's going on?
I know.
Um,
Maybe this is like our members only area where we get tearful and serious.
right, right. Man. Tell us, guys, if that's what you want to see. I don't think anyone wants to see.
I don't think anybody wants to see that.
But yeah, listen, on a serious note, guys, obviously you guys are always sending us suggestions. Please keep it up. We're conducting interviews and creating new content. So lot coming down the pipe this year. So
Yeah.
stick with us.
Yeah, good cases coming up for sure. We've been on the phone with a couple families over the past couple weeks trying to line up times and dates for some really intriguing stories that need your help and your attention. So, I guess that being said, guys, if you believe in what we're doing here and you want to help support the mission of platforming these families and these stories, consider becoming a member. It's $4.99 a month. It's cheaper than this cup of coffee. Believe it or not, we're living in that world now. And it does help us tremendously. And if you can't do that, we get it. Just your viewership and your subscription to the channel that's totally free goes a long way. And we're also, as we always say, we're a podcast too. So if you don't like watching this, you said, man, this was fun to sit through. I wish I could listen to it. You can do that too. Spotify, Amazon, all the normal places. Anything else, Miles?
I think you said it.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.